Well, we now live in a world where Twisted Wonderland is a gothic anime that blends dark fantasy aesthetics with Disney inspired characters and storytelling. And the entire time I kept thinking, this is what High Guardian Spice should have strived to be. So let's talk about it. Twisted Wonderland is exactly what it sounds like. It's Disney meets dark fantasy anime with beautiful gothic visuals and a cast of characters that are compelling enough to keep you watching. Twisted Wonderland started off as a mobile game before branching out into a manga series, and now it has expanded into an animated series that is now streaming on Disney Plus. So, if you're curious about the franchise yourself, there's more than 3 ways to dip your toes right in. It's also worth noting that the creator of Black Butler herself, Yana Tobotsu, is the main concept, scenario, and character designer of this IP, and it really shows. From the designs to the writing to just about everything in Twisted Wonderland. And if you're a Black Butler fan, you'll really love this, especially if you were a fan of the boarding school saga. I know I was all over that. There's also one more thing that I forgot to add. Michael Tatum, the English voice actor for Sebastian, he's voicing Crowley in this. And there are no words to describe how much I loved that guy's performance. Anyway, let's talk about premise. Twisted Wonderland follows the story of Yukin, a young high school boy, walking home from kendo practice when he is whisked away to a world full of magic and mystery. It is revealed that he is the newest student of Night Raven College, but what makes Yukin stand out from the rest of the students is that he has no magic, no special power, no obvious reason to be here, right? Or so we are led to believe. Now left stranded in this new world, Yukin is assigned to an abandoned dorm until the school figures out what to do with him. But before that, he has a run-in with Grimm, a small fire-wielding creature who has been repeatedly rejected from Night Raven and is furious that a magicless outsider got in where he couldn't. It's a clean bit of irony and the show plays it well. The two end up as an unlikely pair, and Yukin eventually adds Ace and Deuce to his circle. Ace and Deuce are two magical capable students who are still trying to figure out who they want to be. With the core group now established, the dynamics are easy to follow, which is exactly what a show like this needs early on. What's interesting about Yukin is that his lack of magic isn't really a weakness, it's kind of his whole thing. His strengths are quieter than that. In fact, he has shown that he can think clearly under pressure, he can read a room, and he gets people moving without making it weird. Is he complicated? No. Does he need to be? Also no. But he is responsible, adaptable, and he genuinely wants to help the people around him, which I know sounds boring on paper, but it lands differently when the writing actually commits to it. So with no secret power, no hidden destiny, Yukin is just a regular kid who figures things out as they go. And that archetype almost never gets played straight anymore, and yet here in Twisted Wonderland, it works because the story trusts him, and that trust really goes a long way. So let's contrast Yukin with Rosemary from High Guardian Spice. Rosemary, who was also a warrior in her story, was depicted as loud and impulsive, which isn't automatically a problem. There have been plenty of great characters who can be both, but Yukin works because he has this underlying trait called humility, something that Rosemary lacked. In fact, she lacked it so much that she rarely faced consequences for her action. And, well, as a result, it was difficult to take her seriously. And that is probably why Rosemary never quite landed with viewers, because she came off as a Mary Sue who got special treatment from the story, and I can't blame people for thinking that. Which brings me to the first thing any show like this needs to get right. Premise. Not theme, not lore, not character backstory, just the basic pitch. What is this show, and why should we keep watching it? I know it sounds like a low bar, but you'll be surprised at how many shows actually trip over this. Though thankfully, Twisted Wonderland doesn't. You're a regular kid with no magic, you're dropped into a school full of powerful students, and that's it. It's clean, immediate, and easy to hold on to. High Guardian Spice, on the other hand, never quite managed that. Sure, on paper, the premise was probably as follows. It's 4 girls enrolled at a magical academy to train as warriors. But the problem was, the show never defined what a guardian actually was, at least not in any meaningful way that stuck. And that single gap quietly undermined everything that the show was trying to build itself off of. Because at the end of the day, if the audience doesn't know what the characters are training to become, then it's hard to care whether they get there or not. And for a show that's built around a school with a very specific purpose like that, that's a very big gap to leave open. And the longer people watched, the wider that gap got. Therefore, a strong premise doesn't have to be complicated, it just has to be clear, and it has to show up early. Therefore, the first few minutes of any story or show should be treated like a solid greeting to the audience. Here's the world, here's who you're following, and here's why it matters. Which is why Twisted Wonderland gets that done with no problem. High Guardian Spice did not, and therefore it kept on trying to promise a good explanation to its viewers in order to keep them hooked. And well, we did eventually get those explanations, and it was quite sloppy, to say the least. In fact, it was so noticeable that it affected the world building, which is what we're going to talk about next. Twisted Wonderland has a very strong sense of world building from the get go. Night Raven College runs on a simple idea: it's 7 dorms, each one built around a different Disney villain. From Maleficent to Scar, Hades, the Evil Queen, Ursula, and the Queen of Hearts herself. What makes it work is that the dorms aren't just an aesthetic. The students inside them actually reflect the values of their villain, from how they think to how they treat each other and what they're willing to do. And that's the difference between a really cool visual concept and one that actually does the narrative work. Of course, the best example to talk about is Hearts the Bull. It's the Queen of Hearts domain, and it runs on rules, strict rules. Their dorm leader, Riddle Rosehearts, enforces them to an insane degree that stops feeling like discipline pretty quickly and starts to feel a lot more like control. And as a result, the dorm gets uncomfortable to watch on purpose, and that discomfort is quite load bearing. In fact, it's doing exactly what world building is supposed to do, which is make the story feel like it has real stakes instead of just a cool setting. Because without real stakes or tension, we, the audience, have nothing to care about. And that pressure cooker feeling connects directly to Riddle himself. His backstory reveals a childhood defined by impossible standards, with a mother who controlled everything he ate, studied, and did, all in the name of making him exceptional. And therefore, the dorm's suffocating rule culture isn't arbitrary or quirky or cute. It's a mirror, a reflection of the inner turmoil going on inside Riddle. And that's the kind of character writing that earns its emotional payoff and is exactly the sort of thing High Guardian Spice needed to understand. That backstory is not a personality. If a character arrives with trauma and leaves with the same habits, the same blind spots, the same way of moving through the world, then the backstory was never really doing anything. If anything, it was being treated as set dressing. Therefore, characterization is what happens when the story costs the character something. And another great sense of world building that lacked in High Guardian Spice was admission. In Twisted Wonderland, the students are selected by an object called the Dark Mirror of Darkness, which selects individuals possessing potential magical abilities and specific soul qualities rather than through a traditional application process. A black carriage is then sent to pick up the chosen student, who are brought to the school regardless of their initial intent to enroll, which is how Yukin found himself at Night Raven. High Guardian Spice never bothered to tell you how anyone got into High Guardian Academy. There was no entrance exams, no tryouts, no moment where the school even hints at what it was looking for in a student. Okay, that's not true. There was a convoluted explanation. Something about a moral code, I think. I know this might sound like a minor thing, but it actually isn't. A school setting only works if you can feel what it means to be there. There has to be stakes. And if the show never bothers to tell you what it costs to get in and stay in, then it just feels pretty pointless. And you're essentially just watching characters walk around and hang out in a building. The character designs are absolutely worth gushing about, and I could go on, so I'm just going to keep this section short for the sake of this video, but maybe later I'll make a longer video about certain designs that I really like. Anyways, from characters like Grimm, who look like trouble, I just love the way he graces the screen with his small, scrappy attitude. Grim is absolutely the kind of creature you expect to cause a scene one moment and then act all innocent about it, just to avoid accountability. But with that said, all the students from the different houses all have similar but unique callbacks to either Disney or even anime references, and they all just ooze personality that makes us want to know more about them. Even Riddle, with his buttoned up and intense sense of style and demeanor, is a clever way that tells you that he's going to be a problem, and probably for reasons that aren't entirely his fault. And you can guess all that before any of the characters utter a word, and that's good character design doing its job. Because the rule is pretty simple. A character's look should tell you something true about them, not everything, but just enough to make you curious. And when the visual and the personality line up, the character feels coherent, and therefore you will notice it right away. And if you have a character that doesn't meet that requirement, well, I think it's safe to say you're going to notice that something is off. Magic is another place where Twisted Wonderland succeeds and High Guardian Spice fumbled. Twisted Wonderland keeps it simple. Students, aka mages, channel magic through a pen and a mage stone, and every student has the potential to develop their own signature spell that is unique to them. And that's the whole system. It's clean, it's personal, and it leaves room to grow. High Guardian Spice did try something more interesting. It was in the concept of old magic versus new magic. And from what I remember, old magic drew energy from the earth, while new magic pulled it out faster using terraspheres, and at such a fast speed, it had a cost called the rot. And this was genuinely not a bad idea. It's just the show introduced it and then didn't know what to do with it, especially when it came to old magic. Old magic in particular never got a proper demonstration on screen. In fact, the closest we might have got to it was when Sage saved some classmates in potions class, and a vague verbal reference to her mother planting trees or performing rituals when using said old magic. FYI, that's not a demonstration, that's more of a footnote. Therefore, a good or memorable magic system only works if we, the audience, can see it in action. In fact, the word guardian has the same problem. It never landed on a definition concrete enough to actually mean anything. And look, I did the homework, I Googled it, and 5 years after the show debuted, a fan wiki tells me that a guardian is a trained protector who has sworn an oath to defend their nation, acting as both a warrior and a guardian of peace. Which is fine, that's a perfectly good thing for a guardian to be. It's just the show never really got around to showing and telling me that. I also want to throw in this little tidbit I discovered was fans on Reddit are still actively debating about what a guardian even is in canon. And for a show that is literally named after that, that's probably not an intentional mystery. That's a gap that never got filled, and at some point, that gap got so big that it stopped being an oversight and started being a huge problem. But to drive my point home further, let's look at two shows that get this right. Tokyo Mew Mew. If I were to ask you what a Mew is, this is what you would answer with. In Tokyo Mew Mew, a Mew is a magical girl whose DNA has been fused with an endangered animal, giving her powers she uses to fight alien invaders. Boom. Done. Okay, well, how about Card Captor Sakura? A card captor is someone who uses a magic wand to capture and tame cloud cards and eventually claim them as her own. Both shows give you the foundation in the first few episodes and then spend the rest of their runtime building on it. And that's just how this works. You establish what your characters are and what they are trying to do and what is at stake, and then you go from there. It's not a complicated task, but this is what you have to do in order to get rewatch value. And that's what it really comes down to. Premise, world building, character design. When those three things are actually doing their job, you don't need to fill in the gaps with shallow, hollow noise. The story can carry itself. Twisted Wonderland gets it, and that's why it has earned its audience. And that groundwork is what makes the payoff land. The Blot, which is Twisted Wonderland's version of corruption, works because it doesn't go after villains. It goes after people who are already cracking. Riddle's Overblot isn't a twist. You see it coming from a mile away, and that's entirely the point. But the show holds him accountable without throwing him away either, which is generally harder to pull off than it sounds. Ultimately, he breaks, gets confronted, and has to make amends, and therefore, we are left with a complete arc. And can we talk about Crowley for a second? I am super impressed at the way he was treated in the story. During the height of the climax, he stepped in when it counted. He didn't swoop in and fix everything with the wave of his wand. He let the students handle their own mess, and they were ultimately able to save Riddle. And that kind of restraint is almost rarer than it should be. But the conflict works because the show has already done the homework. You spent enough time watching Riddle buckle under rules he never chose, and that is when he finally snaps. It felt inevitable rather than convenient. The warning signs were there, and that's the difference between drama that belongs in a story and drama that just gets shoved in to fill in the runtime. So before we wrap everything up, there's also something quietly clever in the way that the game and anime frames its villains. The students of Night Raven don't see them as villains at all. In fact, they are viewed as legends, founders, figures worth emulating. And the dramatic irony is the point. You watch these kids idolize the very qualities that are ultimately going to blow up in their face, and the show trusts you to see it coming. And I don't know about you, but that's a very confident storytelling choice. And it really pays off. So much that I am definitely going to be coming back for season 2 once it drops. And that is all I have to say about Twisted Wonderland for now, because now I want to know your honest thoughts about Twisted Wonderland. Do you think it was worth a watch? What house would you want to be sorted in? Let me know down below and do all those lovely things that the algorithm likes, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!